Hey folks, welcome to the last topic in Chapter 10. You've officially made it to the end of Unit 3 and we're moving into the immunology section after this, so it's all kind of downhill from here. This topic is all about how the drugs we've been talking about impact the host. As we've been talking, we hope that they don't, but they always have some kind of impact, so it's important that we discuss what those are. So why is this topic important? Because no drug, no pharmacology intervention happens without risk to the patient. So it's really important to understand what those risks are so that you can weigh the risks and the rewards when treating patients. So as I said, selective toxicity is ideal, which, as you remember from earlier, is when the drugs target the infectious agent but not the host. But this is not always the case, and about 5% of all people get harmed by taking these drugs. If anything, your microbiota is going to get harmed, which may have long-term effects for you. Anytime that we have these side effects of drugs, there can be all sorts of issues. And these side effects can range from direct damage of tissues, which is toxicity, to allergic reactions, which is the overreaction of your immune system, to the disruption of your normal microbiota, as we keep talking about. And we're going to go through each of these in the next couple slides. So first of all is toxicity. Any drug can affect any specific organ. Now usually they have specific targets, so we'll know that, for instance, drug A, it targets the liver, while drug B targets the bones. So we know that. And so what we can do with that information is that if you have a patient who needs a drug, but they have liver damage already, we don't want to prescribe them a drug that can cause further liver damage. Unless we don't have another choice. So that's what is important about toxicity, is being aware of what the drugs do, and this is part of what is done when these drugs are released to market, is we know what their potential toxicities are. And make sure that you pay attention to the patient history so you can match that toxicity. So that's basically the big key on toxicity. Toxicity is actual damage to the host cells. These are cells that are damaged by the antibiotic just as much as they are damaged as the infectious agent is damaged. So allergic response is an overreaction of the immune system. We've all had one at one point in time or another probably, and it's a heightened sensitivity to the drug. So what happens is the drug will stimulate the immune response, and the immune response can go crazy. Now, these allergic responses can be anything from a rash to a fatal reaction. So it's really important to be aware of that, and everybody has, a lot of people rather, have allergic responses to different drugs. I am allergic to drugs. My husband's allergic to a specific type of drug. So that's one of those things that it's really important to pay attention to, especially if you have children and the first time they're administered drugs, you want to pay attention because sensitization is what will occur that first time the drug is given. And usually you'll see just a small indicator, so it could just be a small rash or a small reaction. And every time you give that drug every time afterwards you give that drug, the reaction can get worse. So it's really important to pay attention to that the first time you administer any drug to any kind of person because of that allergic reaction, because it could only get worse. So just to remind you, just to hit that objective again, toxicity is the damage to the host cells by the drug, where the allergic response is an overreaction of the immune system to the drug. So those are the two differences between them. Now let's talk about the microbiota and what's important about them. Now the microbiota can be killed off sometimes easier than the pathogen by the antibiotics that are being used. And so what happens then is if you kill off everything else that's competing for nutrients, the pathogen is going to be able to flourish. And this creates what is known as a superinfection. And so then the superinfection is even worse. Because they've already been exposed to the antibiotic, they may have developed resistance or may have always been resistant to that antibiotic. So now you're back to square one. So it's really important to have a good handle on how that's working and to try to protect that microbiota for as long as you can when treating infections, because it's helping prevent that infection, because it's their environment too. They don't want that pathogen there any more than you do. So we've talked about this a lot with the shotgun versus the sniper approach. And this is kind of some final thoughts for you guys on the use of antimicrobials and how important they are, but also how we have to be really careful with them. So we used to believe there was a cure-all. You know, if you had a nose or a sinus infection, here, have some antibiotics. Well, sinus infections tend to almost always be viral, and as we've learned, antibiotics don't work very well against viral infections unless you're using a specific one. And we haven't really developed a whole lot of really strong ones, especially for something as simple as a sinus infection. Usually our antivirals are something we're looking for a lot stronger, deadlier viruses. And so if we don't have any harm or have any effect on that disease, all we're doing then is creating more resistant bacteria. And this can be really harmful in the food chain, like especially if you're talking about cattle or pork or anything like that being fed these antibiotics. They're also increasing that resistance within the environment. So it's really important to be careful with them, but recognize that they are still really useful. It's not to say we shouldn't still use them and we shouldn't still be using them to treat our infections, but it's a very delicate balance that we have to have. And so I want you to really think about that and what the implications are. We've been learning a lot about how these microbes can evolve really quickly, and so that's where these antibiotics and this resistance mechanism is coming from. So it's really important that we balance it out, especially when you're thinking also in regard to host toxicity. So make sure you pay attention to all those aspects of it and really think about this. This is more of a thought-provoking slide than anything I really want you to get from this. But as I said in the last topic, the more we come to understand our microbiota and how important that is, potentially the better use we'll be able to make of that aspect of our gut or our other parts that we have the microbiota on to prevent and treat infections. So I think this is really a cool field. It's really expanding. I think that it's potentially something that's going to be really interesting in the future. So I encourage you to stay abreast of the information and think about it and take it in. As a healthcare professional, it's always important to be aware of the new developments in the field. This is the end of this lecture. If you have any questions about the objectives or want to talk about any of these topics again, please let me know. And as always, you can email me or come to my office hours.